You're joining me today at the absolute stunning MOnkhall Fishery, where I'm going to be taking you through a tactic that I've been using through the winter months on lots of different venues around the country. And that is fishing with pellets, but re-plumbing up and restarting lines without priming, which has been absolutely massive for me. I feel like the fish in the winter months, that they don't feed aggressively, they won't keep returning to the same pot. So if you just keep re-plumbing, keep moving along your peg in the direction you think the fish have moved, I can assure you, you're going to catch you plenty of these through the winter months. So what do I exactly mean by re-plumbing up and starting again? Now for me, like I mentioned very briefly, the fish this time of year, once you've fed a line and you start catching on it, they tend to drift away because they're not feeding very aggressively. And it's not like in the summer where the fish will just keep returning to a line because they want to eat lots of bait. This time of year it can be quite the opposite. So for me, on venues like this where you're fishing up to an island, there's two depths to look for. So you've got the deepest water in your peg, which tends to be down the middle, and then you've got a line near to the bank, near to the far bank margin, where you're going to be looking for about 3 to 3.5 foot of water. Now for me, starting short can be very good, but starting across in that shallower water is also very good. Now what will happen in general is that you'll be fishing across, and what I try to do is start dead in front of me, and then I will tap in just a tiny little bait, try my best to catch 2 or 3 fish, and then look to use other people to try and work out where the fish have moved to. So if I had a guy to my right and he's had 4 or 5 fish, and the guy to my left hasn't had any fish, for me the perfect move would be to move to my right towards where the fish have moved. Look at the size of that. And that's the sort of fish you can catch this time of year just by tapping a little bit of bait in. But just by re-plumbing up in the same sort of depth that you started your day at can be absolutely brilliant, which I'll explain in a little bit more depth in a second. But these really are the size of fish you're looking for to win matches this time of year, and that's the size of fish you catch when you're fishing with pellets. Look at the size of that. Absolutely beautiful fish. Right, so I'll explain in a little bit more detail exactly what I mean. So obviously I'm fishing already and I've set my float to 3 foot. I've put my plummet on, then I've gone across and actually found the depth. Rather than setting your float to the depth that is right by the feature, I look to find the depth. So 3 to 3.5 foot this time of year is absolutely brilliant. So right, I've put my plummet on and I'll start dead in front of me, which I'll show you now. So my float's set at about 3 to 3.5 foot of water there, and that is at that exact distance there. Now what will happen in a lot of matches this time of year, I'll go in there, I'll tap in my 30 to 40 micros, I might hopefully catch one, then I'll repeat it, catch one, then I'll repeat it and catch one. But like what I mentioned, they won't keep coming to that point. So if the guy to my right hasn't caught and the guy to my left has caught, it might be an option just to move up to your left, find a new marker at the exact same depth, the exact same rig, find the depth, which would be about there, which is right on the edge of that platform, and I can just repeat the process. So what I've done directly in front of me, just by tapping in my micros, then I can move to my left, I can repeat the process, I can tap in my micros, and then I can even go to my right. So I can go all the way over, past where, this sort of way, and I can find that depth there, which is absolutely perfect, which gives me 3 lines. Now, a lot of the time you won't be able to return to a line that you've started on, that you've caught on, because the fish just won't come back to that line. So replumbing up, finding the same depth along your peg, starting your peg, no need to prime it. So if you're fishing one of these lines, and then you're thinking about moving to another one, there's no need to just pre-bait it. Just literally move along to the marker, tap your micros in, repeat the process, and I can guarantee you that'll keep a few fish coming in your net for most of the match. So a lot of the venues I've been going to recently, pellets really has been the best bait. Now for me, fishing pellets in the winter means fishing micros and expanders. Hard pellets in the winter just really isn't an option. It's just not quite as good as fishing with micros and expanders. So all I've done simply this morning is I've got my 2mm Fin Perfect feed pellets. I've put them in a bait box. I've just literally covered them in water. So like the top of the water just covers the pellets. I've let them soak for probably 90 minutes to 2 hours, and they're absolutely perfect. When you get them dead right, what you'll notice is when you run off your fingers, they're actually separate pellets. You don't want it so they're over soaked so they stick together. So when you actually put them into your Kinder pot and try tapping them out, they won't tap out. You want them individual pellets, and soaking them like that really is perfect. And then my 4mm Sonubaits F1 Sweet Pro expanders, I've literally, you can't get any easier way of preparing them. So I've literally got a handful of them, put them in a bait box, cover them in water, and away you go. That's the best thing about these expanders. The preparation is so easy. I'll very quickly take you through the rig. Now this is my go-to pellet rig. To start off with, we've got a size 16 hook. You don't mess about with small hooks with pellets. Obviously you're sinking the hook into the expander pellet. So there's no need to go to like 18 and 20 hooks. A big size 16 Matrix X2 hook really is paramount. I like to use 010 hook lengths this time of year. If I was fishing for solely carp, I might step up to like 012, but this time of year when the water's clear, 010 really is perfect. I'm a massive fan of long hook lengths, so for all of my fishing now, I use a 12-inch hook length. The only downside to a 12-inch hook length is that you do have to put a shot on the hook, onto the hook length. And I like to put that shot that's on the hook length quite close to the hook. I've done quite a bit of underwater filming, and the one thing that's stood out for me is just how little you see once that fish has picked your hook bait up. So I've actually got a number 8 cube about 4 inches from my hook, just clipped onto my 12-inch hook length. Just at the top of that hook length, I've got my bulk, which I use shot for this, so they don't slide about, so they're locked into position. So no matter how quick you're catching it, it will all stay in place. I've got 2 number 11s just at the top of the bulk, just to trim my bristle down. 014 hook length. The float itself is a 0.4 Matrix Stubby Slim. Now this has got a 0.7 bristle, which is really important for me when you're fishing for pellets. A 4mm expander is quite a heavy bait. So you don't want to be messing about with 1.2, 1.5 mil hollow bristles. A 1.7 bristle really is paramount. The length of line between my float and my pole tip is what I use every single time I make my pole rigs up. I use a 22 or 24-inch line between the float and the pole tip, depending on the weather. I've got 2 number 8 back shot just spread out. I've got one at about 10% and one at about 40%. Now I don't like two back shot placed together because I feel like it drags my float. So just by spreading them out, it makes it just a little bit nicer and holds the float in place a little bit better. Got a Matrix 6 to 9 slick elastic through a short kit, which is what I use for pretty much everything this time of year when fishing on snake lakes like this. A medium flexible toss pot, and I've actually just got the sprinkle lid on, which is really important because what I want to do today, obviously I've mentioned plumbing up and restarting lines. I want to be able to fill my pot up like so, just fill that pot up with micros, and I want to be able to go out to the point where I'm fishing, turn my pot over, tap my pole, and literally tap in about 30. Try and get a bite. If you can't get a bite, repeat the process. Turn the pot over, tap the pole, and away you go. Right, so obviously I've plumbed up. I'm actually on my 2nd line now. So I started dead in front of me, but I caught a couple and it's just gone a little bit funny, which is as perfect what I expected to happen. So what I'm going to do, I've replumbed up another line just to my right, and then I'm going to start my line. So I'm just going to sink my size 16 hook into my 4mm expander. fill my pot up and go out to the point. Now the brilliant way of fishing, the brilliant thing about fishing like this is that you don't have to mess about picking other rigs up. You can literally have your rig set at this depth and then replumb up to the depth of the rig rather than replumbing up to the depth of the peg, if that makes sense. So I'm just going to go out to my second spot, get right in line with my marker. It's a little bit windy, but we're just going to try and keep that float in place as best as possible. One really important thing when fishing with pellets is that you are fishing for real decent fish. You're fishing for the size of fish that are going to win you the match. So keeping your float as still as possible is important. I've just placed my rig in and I'm going to turn my pot over right on my marker. I turn it over to about 3 o'clock and I'm just going to tap the pole, tap a few micros out, about 30 to 40 micros come out. I'm going to turn the pot over and then I'm going to start fishing. Now, one other thing you've got to do as well when you're fishing like this, one thing I've noticed, especially here at MOnkhall, is that the fish, where they're sat, they really do show themselves. So I've had a load of fish topping up to my left up to that aerator today. So it might be a case that your next move along your peg is where the fish are showing or where other people are catching. So if I was sat here today and I'm fishing right on this spot and then all of a sudden I've seen 2 fish top 4 to 5 meters to my right and I've caught a couple here, my next move for me definitely would be just to move to the right towards the fish. They do definitely sit in little pods this time of year. They're not going to be moving about like they are in the summer, moving about off the bottom. They tend to just sit, because the water like this time of year now is like 4 to 5 degrees, so you can imagine it's very cold. So they're just going to sit in little areas in your peg and you can almost move them by catching them. So I'll catch a couple here and then I'll look to try and find where else they are in the peg and then they'll move to them. So I've got out to my point, my float is sat absolutely beautiful. Those 2 number 8 back shot are just locking that float in position. I've tapped in my 30 to 40 micros. One thing I want to mention as well, when you're tapping in your micros, when you just think about the height that you're tapping them in from, it really does make a big difference. So if I was to tap them in from like 2.5 foot today, that would make a lot of noise, but it can tend to draw the fish up off the bottom. So I tend to start my peg just tapping them in from about 18 inches from the top of the water. But if I go in, I foul hook one, I might miss a bite. I might just drop that down to about 6 inches off the water, make less noise and try and keep the fish on the bottom. But if you're going in and you're not getting any indications whatsoever, it might be an idea to drop them in from like 2 foot off the water and just make a little bit more noise. But it sounds stupid because 2mm pellets are so small, but when it's flat, calm like this, you've got no ripple, no noise, those 2mm pellets going in really do make a noise. I've seen it at a local venue to me that I've been fishing a lot, where it's like 8 foot deep, and the height that you drop them in from in 8 foot of water still makes a big difference, which you wouldn't think in that depth of water, but it really does. Like sometimes if I drop them in from like 2 foot off the water, I get liners on my float because I've made noise and I've brought them up off the bottom. So that venue in particular, what I tend to do is just literally drop my cup about 6 inches from the top of the water, tap in my micros and be there nice and patient, be nice and quiet and try and get those micros to the bottom and try and hook one in the mouth and not miss any bites, not miss any indications. So I reckon that's been about 2 minutes now since I tapped those micros in. I'll give it about another minute and then I'll repeat the process. I'll turn my pot over and I'll try and make a little bit more noise and try and draw a fish into my peg. There's no indications off that feed so far, which is perfectly normal because we've just started a new line. And when you've moved to a new line, sometimes you have to feed maybe 2 or 3 times to get them to come to that bait before you hook one. But normally once you hooked one, the next time you go in, you just feed once and you catch a fish off the back of what you fed before. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to put a few of those micros in, like 30 to 40 micros. Be careful because they do tend to come flying out of your pot when you're fishing with a long pole. Obviously the longer your pole you fish with, and the more it flexes, so the less you have to tap your pole. So I'm just going to try and lock that float in position right on top of those micros. The one other great thing about fishing like this is that your accuracy is absolutely perfect. You're tapping your micros in and you're dropping your float right in the middle of them. And those micros are only having to fall 3 foot, because it's only 3.5 foot deep. So you know your hook bait is right smack in the middle of them. So when you get a fish come into your peg, they don't move quickly this time of year. They'll move into your peg really slowly. There's a very good chance, because your hook bait is bigger than the bait that you're feeding, that they'll come in. And even if you've got 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 micros on the bottom, there's a very good chance those big carp can come in and they'll single out your hook bait. A 4mm expander is quite a bit bigger than the 2mm. So there's a very good chance the first fish that comes into your peg, oh, there's a little indication there. I thought that was going to fly under, to be honest. The other thing that is worth noting as well when fishing expanders is so important that you strike right. The last thing that I would want is an indication like what I had then, and to strike in a way that the pellet comes off, and then all of a sudden you've got to come all the way back in. You've got to ship 14.5 metres of pole back in, ship all the way back out, and you've lost an opportunity of a bite. A lot of the time when you get an indication like that, that means there's a fish in your peg. So you can strike. If there's nothing on, drop your float straight back down in where you've had that indication. And a lot of the time you'll get a bite really quickly. If you're shipping in because your expanders has come off, then you've lost that opportunity. If you can just strike in a way that your pellet never comes off, is so important. So we had an indication off that second feed, but it didn't amount to a bite. Which is absolutely fine. You just got to be patient this time of year. I mean, catching fish like what I caught that last one, realistically, you don't need many fish at all. You're probably looking at 10 or 12 of them today, and you've put together a match-winning weight. Oh, what a bite that was. That was unbelievable. Just sat there, it's just gone really quickly. That's the sort of bite you're after. Really confident, really positive. But that just shows you the effectiveness of just literally using the same rig, same depth everywhere. Just plumbing up in a new spot. I tapped in a few micros, got an odd little indication. Second feed, sat there for probably 90 seconds, and it's just gone really quickly. And that's the sort of bites you're looking for. But that just shows you just how well it works. Like in a 5-hour period, in match period, you might have to do that like 6 or 7 times during the match. You might have to start dead in front of you and then move like 6, 7 times. Just keep moving towards the fish. Use the fish that are top in as a sign where to move. Use other people on what they're catching as a sign where to move. And I feel like this time of year, the people that will win the matches will gauge how quickly to move and where to move the best. This could take up to like 4 hours of your match. There is one line this time of year maybe you might want to prime up, and that's just throwing maggots short out your hand. But I can promise you, fishing with pellets this time of year can be absolutely brilliant. Just starting in front of you, re-plumbing up, working along your peg, and if you can do that and you can get all the timings of your peg dead right, I can guarantee you're going to catch loads of these and win lots of matches.